I think this declaration is actually very much more interesting to us as museum people and people interested in culture and intangible cultural heritage. And this is the Freiburg Declaration on Cultural Rights, which was produced in 2007. And it's really interesting because it actually gives us some really useful definitions to work with. So they define culture in this way. Culture is those values, beliefs, convictions, languages, knowledge, and the arts, traditions, institutions, and ways of life through which a person or group expresses their humanity. So clearly embedded in there is a lot of the ICH that we're talking about, isn't it? Arts, knowledge, traditions, institutions, ways of life. Those are all the things that we've been looking at in our field work and which we'll continue to work with this week. And of course, all these aspects of culture help to form cultural identity. Yeah? So cultural identity then is the sum of all cultural references through which a person, or alone or in a community with others, defines or constitutes oneself, communicates and wishes to be recognized. So we all have our cultural identity as well as personal identities, and we carry that with us. And it's something, of course, when we're in this situation, sometimes we have to try to step outside of our own cultural identities in order to understand others. This idea of cultural diversity and cultural identity is also related to the idea of a cultural community. A cultural community is a group of persons who share references that constitute a common cultural identity that they intend to preserve and develop. Now, we're all part of all sorts of different cultural communities, okay? So I'm English, so that's part of a cultural community of which I'm part. I'm also part of an academic community because I work in a university. So that's also a cultural community of which I'm part. I'm part of this very tiny cultural community which is interested in eco-museums and community museology. So that's another community, cultural community I'm involved in. But then at a personal level, you know, I'm very keen at, I don't know if anyone's heard of fly fishing, but this is going out and fishing with a rod and a line and a little fly and catching trout. So I'm part of a fly fishing community as well. Okay? A broad one, which is worldwide. You know, a really bit of interesting ICH, I think, actually, fly fishing. But then when I go fly fishing, I actually go on usually every weekend to one particular loch in Scotland where I fish. A loch is a lake. Okay? And I meet a group of people there every week, the same people. We have a very close community, so I'm part of that very tight cultural community there. So these things are really interesting to us, especially when we see potential conflict, as you can see in this cartoon. Okay, not to worry, diversity can only enrich our culture. Well, not necessarily, okay? But, I mean, it's interesting living in a place like England because, you know, we're a very mongrel group of people. You know, we've been invaded by just about everyone. You know, people from Scandinavia, people from France. You know, we've been invaded by Normans and all kinds of people. All right? But what that means really for us is that we have actually, as a result of that, got sort of quite a complex system. But in more recent years, of course, we've accepted people from the West Indies, from our various places which in the past were part of the British Empire. So we've got this very, very rich diversity of cultures in the country in which I live. So in a way, this is sort of enrichment, and it's quite fascinating to consider. So what else does this Freiburg Declaration tell us? Well, that everyone, alone or in a community, has the right to respect one's cultural identity. Everyone is free to identify with several communities, the point of which I was making. And Article 5 indicates that everyone has the right to participate in cultural life, to be free to exercise their cultural practices, and important really for today, to share knowledge about cultural expressions, and to protect the material and moral interests linked to the works that result from one's cultural activity. So sharing knowledge and cultural expressions and protecting the material and moral interests linked to the things that are produced. So you have knowledge about how to weave, or you have knowledge about how to make a basket. How do you protect that knowledge for your own community? But more importantly, how do you sustain those kinds of practices, and how are they going to be conserved for the future? Article 8 states that everyone has the right to participate in the cultural development of the community and to be involved in making decisions that conserve oneself and the community. So here again, going back to some of the things that we've touched on several times already, that most of the resource persons have referred to in their lectures, this idea of participation, democracy, good communication, working together really to make decisions about the future. So this idea, if you like, of democratic governance. So I think this declaration is actually really useful for us as museum people, because it gives us all sorts of guidance about how museums might operate when dealing with ethnic minority groups, or indeed any specific community with a shared culture. So it might be an ethnic minority group, or it might be a group of rapper dancers in Newcastle, or a group of Northumbrian pipers who are spread throughout the world. Okay? So we have to think about what our specific communities with shared cultures actually are. Who are we working with as museum people? Who do I identify with when we're carrying out our conservation work?